know, yeah, I feel like we've been doing this for 16 years. So I'm Tim McCarthy, 17, who's counting? And so Marshall and I started exploring the sacred 17 years ago. If you guys can believe it's been 17 years. And it's, I guess to me, it's ironic that, you know, we started it with the Gulf War raging, and now this week it's the Palestine-Israel war raging. I like to think that we're making progress, but sometimes I question it. But I think we're doing something in our little corner of the world, and I'd like to think that we can continue to do that, and at least maybe we change each other's lives here in this group, and that's I think all we can hope for maybe is, you know, you change your little sphere of influence, and hopefully there's ripple effects that go out to the world, and you know, we change our children's lives, and that's the whole reason we started this thing, is to bring people together. So anyway, that's exploring the sacred. I don't know, do you guys want to go through the whole introducing yourselves?
Yes, jump in, guys.
Sure. I'm Tim Olmsted from the Buddhist community.
I'm Karen Post, and I lead the local Course in Miracles study group.
Tim Selby, I'm the Heart of Steamboat United Methodist Church.
Ernest Bear, pastor at Holy Name Catholic Church.
And I'm Joanne Grace. I serve as chaplain for hospice here in Steamboat.
And then I'm Marshall. I don't know if to mention that, but we just do the moderating and organizing. But I wanted to also let you know that Steve Agner is here, and he's going to just be listening in silently. He represents the community of Islam here in Steamboat. He's a Sufi Muslim, but he's having some health stuff going on right now. So he's here, but he'll be just probably a silent participant, but wanted everyone to know. So thanks for joining us. Tonight's topic is the horrific versus the beatific. And I know it's kind of a mouthful. And Joanne came up with this idea, and it really got us into some interesting conversations. I think when Joanne brought it up, she was referring to, like, when people go through things that are really difficult, can we still find the beatific in it? So we thought we'd start with defining some terms, just because some of these might not resonate with everyone. So when we talk about the word horrific, what we're talking to is sort of the whole gamut of kind of bad things. So this could be everything from just our daily anxieties, getting cut off in traffic, having to pay bills, dealing with life, juggling work and kids, whatever's happening in people's lives, all the way up to some more like major life circumstances like trauma and maybe dealing with death and COVID over the last year. So it kind of runs the gamut of what we might consider like bad things happening, right? And then the beatific, we spent a little time as a group defining what we mean by this term, that was kind of fun in and of itself. But what we decided on is the beatific is what points to that which is spacious, whole, unchanging, pure, and sacred. And so we'd like to start off, like, I will try to keep referring back to those terms, but keep that in mind as we go through the conversation today, those are the terms that we're referring to. That's what they mean. So the first question is this idea that most of us tend to try to avoid the horrific, right? We try to avoid stress and bad things happening, death, and we also tend to kind of cling to or look for what's beatific, what's holy or sacred in our lives, right? So the first question is, like, are these two things, is the horrific really negative? And is the beatific like positive? Are these sort of opposites, or is one better than the other? So Joanne, did you want to start for us?
Well, I can certainly jump in. This, for me, was a curious question as I worked not only with people in hospice, but just people basically in trauma, and began to discover a little bit about anytime we go through change, that change is often initiated by something that's horrific. And so the nature, particularly in our Christian tradition, of the apocalyptic nature of our tradition, is one in which awful things are happening, and yet at the same time there is a new understanding of the sacred, of the divine, of who God is during that time. So as I began exploring a little bit, what I began to discover is I don't necessarily think one is positive and one is negative. I think they more interact in a dynamic process, and that sometimes we get stuck in one or the other because of perhaps the way our memory works. So that would be, I think, my opening thing, is that when we go through change, this often happens, whether it's a devastating change. There was an example I had today of a woman who, this is a very recent death and very sudden death, and yet she said it really, even though it was sudden, it's a blessing in disguise. So I'll hear that a lot, that it, even though this is pretty horrific and it's a sudden kind of experience, she was able to hold on to the blessing or the hope that her husband did not have to suffer a lot because it was rapid. So that kind of is an encapsulated just experience I had today.
Yeah, so somebody finding that beatific thing, it wasn't
Within it.
ended up being a positive thing, even though we might initially think of it as horrific.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. What about for others?
Well, I like what Joanne said, that we often see change as the horrific, as the unwanted, because I think we see change as uncomfortable. But if we cling to the known, to the comfortable, to what we hope might be the beatific, we're never growing. We're staying in a comfort zone, and to get out of our comfort zone means to willingly step into that fear. That's where we get, our self-confidence. That's where, we learned to walk through that fear. And so, I think a lot of people are facing this after this year of, shutdown and isolation. We stayed in a small environment to be healthy, and that's what was suggested to do. But as people are stepping out, they've lost that taking that risk. And so sometimes we actually build the horrific by trying to avoid it. If we get used to just walking into the unknown and taking those risks, we recognize not everything works out, but there is something that we learn in just taking those risks. So again, with Joanne, I'd agree, they work together, and it's not a negative or positive. It's they both work for our strengths.
I think that actually is, the current research out even on trauma care right now, is that it's the focus now on the strengths that are coming out of the trauma rather than the trauma itself. So we're not alone in this, let's put it that way, in terms of the research.
In our tradition, at least in the philosophic tradition, we would suggest that the very idea that something is horrific or beatific, these are constructs that in and of themselves, things are not, good or bad. They're just whatever arises in the circumstance of our life, the nature of impermanence, birth, old age, sickness, and death. This is what we call the three streams of suffering. But whether it's horrific or not, this depends on how we look at it. The classic example is to talk about the relationship between tall and short. Something is tall only because something in relationship to it is short. That tall thing in relation to something else will be short. So there's no inherent sort of good or bad about something. And so it's our making, a somewhat arbitrary decision that this is good and that's bad. Then we split those, and then we go to battle with our experience. And so in some ways, the whole thing, the hoping for the beatific and fearing the horrific, these are two sides of the same coin. It's the same kind of agitation, we would say, that an inability to just be present with whatever, and somewhat balanced with whatever is going on. And then the beatific and the horrific actually come together, and the need to label it one way or another begins to soften up, and we can just deal, with what is ever going on.
So Tim, let me press you on that a little bit. What about what about a 3-year-old that dies of starvation, or a 5-year-old with a brain tumor? Is that just seen as that's just that particular circumstance? There's no good or bad to that.
Yeah, of course, no, I get
that operate?
I get what you're saying. So, well, if someone dies of a brain cancer, it's completely heartbreaking. There's no good. This is not to take the pathos, the poignancy out of our life. It's not that at all. It's to become a little less insane of always fighting with everything. But when we see other people fighting with their situation that is painful, of course, we have big hearts. And so we connect in very, very, very deeply. In some ways, others' pain becomes even more immediate to us because we're not so much fighting our own, trying to manipulate our own inner experience. We're able to be more available to others. So, yeah, I could see that easily could look like kind of almost mechanistic and nihilistic. In other words, that nothing matters. That's not the point there. No.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and asking that question, I certainly don't question
Yeah.
your feeling about anything. It's
Yeah.
more of a philosophical question in terms of, it seems like there are some things in our world that they are horrific. You mentioned early on, Marcel, like we try to avoid, either stress or pain or grief or whatever the hardship may be. How's that working out for you? We'd all like to avoid that. It all comes our way, nonetheless. And I think for me, our ability to experience that is part of the depth of our being. In our Christian tradition, I think we in the Christian tradition feel pretty profound that Jesus enters into that really painful, difficult, agonizing journey that we live on, and yet at the same time, the whole form for tonight, it's beautiful at the same time. Like it's both those things all the same place. And so, but man, I think there are horrible things in our world. There are beautiful things in our world. And I think our ability to enter into all of that is where maybe the richness is found. I mean, we live in a world with Auschwitz and war and, to Tim's Gaza or the Gulf War or whatever it may be. Some really terrible things. And we live in a world where on a daily basis, beauty and goodness is shared in amazing ways each and every day. I don't know what to say about that other than yes, all of that is our experience. All of that is where the sacred, I think, is found in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, just the ability to open to all of it, it sounds like is what you're saying. Yeah. What about for you, Ernest? Is there a dichotomy between these two?
I would say so, kind of along the lines of what Tim Selby was saying. I was just thinking about the ancient Jews reflected on the problem of, tragedy, pain, suffering, death. They reflected on it and when they wrote the creation story. And their perspective from the inspired Jewish writer basically wrote a story saying in the beginning, God created it all good. God intended it all to be good. He intended it all to be beautiful, Garden of Eden, so to speak. And it's human selfishness. In some cases, now I want to qualify this, in some cases, the horrific is caused by human selfishness, greed, violence, call it sin if you want from a Christian perspective. Like we are responsible for a lot of the horrors in the world, like Auschwitz and Israel, the Gaza Strip, and things like that, air pollution, messing up the world. And so from that Jewish perspective, God's a good God. He's a beautiful God, created a beautiful place, created us in God's image to live and enjoy this beautiful garden. And we messed it up by our selfishness or our pride or our greed or whatever, our fear, our insecurity, whatever it is. I will now then, of course, we have to allow for the fact that lots of horrific things happen that we can't blame on people, like cancer in the brain, or some kid dying at the age of 5 from some cerebral palsy or whatever. Even COVID. I mean, let's just forget all the conspiracy theories. Diseases are normally not caused by human beings. So that's, I would call the horrific, like this. Well, it's all those things I think are horrific in the sense that they are not the good that God wanted us to experience. And it causes pain and suffering, and doubt even, and depression and suicide and that sort of thing, and drug addiction, all these horrible things. But as Tim Selby said, from the Christian perspective, we believe our God entered into that fallen world, entered into that sinful world and took it upon himself and descended to the depths of it. And in so doing, sort of expressed love, unconditional love. Like, I'm accepting this for you. I'm offering myself for you. Greater love has no one than to lay down their life for one's friends. So even in the horror of the crucifixion, we see the beauty of God's unconditional love expressed. So in that sense, it's a both and. Like, the horrific can be beautiful if it's entered into with a selfless motive, with a loving motive, with care for other people, or even, I'm going to let this thing humble me. I'm not in control. The serenity prayer, help me to accept the things I cannot change. That can lead to our spiritual growth, and all of that can be good. And the primary metaphor for that, or primary example of that, is Jesus rising from the dead. Brings good can come out of horror. Beauty can come out of horror. God can transform it and bring it back to the beautiful again. And so from the Christian perspective, Jesus rises from the dead and another garden, to kind of bring it full circle and give us a new beginning. So, and then we're just called to love each other and serve each other and maybe enter into each other's pain and help each other carry their crosses or carry their sufferings and try to reveal our love for one another, even in the midst of suffering. So that in that sense, it can be very beautiful.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Ernest.
Mm.
And then I want to go back to something, Karen, that you talked about too, in terms of this, how we tend to avoid the horrific and stay away from it. And you were saying we need to enter into it. What is sort of the cost or the downside or consequence of trying to avoid suffering? I know, Tim Selby, you said kind of good luck with that because we can't really do it. But I'd love for any of you to just comment on that.
I think when we try to avoid it, we allow fear to dominate our life. And so I think this is what Tim Olmsted was sort of pointing at. It's not that the horrific is okay or it's not painful. But very often when we make it the enemy and try to avoid it, instead of feeling safer by avoiding fear, that fear grows. I see that in people all the time. And so you were talking, Ernest, sort of about, I can't remember the exact word you were using, but in a way, sort of surrendering to it. That's walking through our fears, giving up our control. And it's in walking through the fear. If you sort of think about, fear being a storm cloud and the truth and love and light on the other side of that. If you walk through that storm cloud, you get into the light. It can be really scary. What you were saying, Tim, it doesn't mean that this is a good thing or it's a pleasant thing. In fact, if it were a good thing, or if you just rethought it as in this isn't, real or whatever, then that surrender is meaningless. But sometimes in walking through the fear and walking through that bank, we reach a state of grace or liberation. I guess you would see it, Joanne, in people facing death. They're afraid of that death, but when they hit that moment of acceptance, I was with my father as he died. Boy, there was a real peace. There was a real opening. But up until that moment where he was, taking his final breath, there had been fear, and then the fear was released, or he moved through it.
I think along with, as you're talking, Karen, about the fear, one of my observations about resisting the horrific or denying it, avoiding it, has to do with just this emotional roller coaster that people get on. And then from that emotional roller coaster, there's sort of behavioral actions, there's expressions that come out of that. And some of those are just to numb the experience, to numb the pain. So the cost of it is, I think we see it in behaviors, drug addictions, for example. We also see it in physical ailments. Some of the people that come in with the ailments they have, and the body speaks, the body's going to store it, whether our mind wants to deal with it or not. And so I think there are physical ailments that are associated with it, depending on sort of the genetic makeup of the person, because it does, it does affect our brain very definitely. So I think it takes a toll on the physical body as well.
Yeah.
And family systems. I mean, it also takes its toll on that.
Mhm.
People are
I think that, as Karen was saying earlier, if we're always trying to fend off something that we're afraid of, then we live in constant, some kind of agitation of some kind, whether it be fear, it be anxiety, anger, whatever it might be. And then there's no end to it. Then the faster we try to fend things off, things get more and more solid, more and more tight. We become more and more anxious, and we perceive, consequently, a world that looks correspondingly tight, speedy, and anxious. That's just the nature of perception. When we're fearful here, we see a threatening world. When we're balanced and open and relaxed here, we perceive the world in that way. It doesn't mean that we don't see horrible things happening, but those horrible things happen in a larger context of a bigger clarity and more balance here.
It seems, Tim, as you're talking, what I'm reminded of, it's almost as though we end up living out of a survival mentality.
I think you're exactly right. I think you're exactly right. And I think along the spiritual path, the contemplative path, I don't know if the job is, but what happens is we begin to sink down through those layers of that survival fear. It's that, the outer anxiety, subtle anxiety, really subtle, survival anxiety, and go all the way under that. And I think all of the contemplative traditions talk about the sort of the quality that is underneath all of that shakiness is a quality of tenderness, of openness, connectedness, and wholeness. But it calls us to go all the way down through it rather than trying to run away from it to find that somewhere else.
Yeah, I think that's important, that sinking in, that touching in on that constant, that solidity gives us the strength to maybe get through the horrific. I mean, because rather than it overwhelms us, by that quality of sinking in and knowing that strength, is a way to walk through the horrific, and then knowing that you have that strength, that connection to God, or however people want to look at it, and that you can survive it, and that there may be something that you've gotten out of it or learned. I think that gives you the courage to face the other horrific things, because you do survive it. You come out stronger. And so fear grasps you less and less as you keep moving through these experiences, which, quite frankly, we can't avoid. It's part of living in a dualistic nature. If there's going to be the beatific, there's going to be the horrific.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Could be like a denial of reality. We're trying to avoid the horrific. We're trying to imagine that there's no horrific in the world, but the reality is it's there. And so it's just part of being in touch with reality. There's good days, there's bad days, there's good things and bad things. So it's a matter of accepting reality, accepting life on life's terms. And also we might miss the lesson. We can always learn humility or wisdom or patience or forgiveness or whatever it is. There's a lesson in there if we lean into the horrific and learn. We can learn from it and we can grow from it, become a better person.
It strikes me too, as we do this, as we sink down into it, we're very similar to we get into our instinct brain, just the animal nature in us, where we recognize at some level because it is so overwhelming that we're in our own shock, in that survival where we recognize, again, as you were talking, Ernest, about the powerless nature in which we as human beings have over anything to control it. And that is in itself, in terms of the spiritual discipline, that place of surrendering, where all of a sudden it's like, there's not a darn thing I can do. And I surrender, as Karen, you were talking about, into that state of peace or that state of calm. So I think, Tim, that sinking down that you're talking about it's part of that process. That then that may be one of the things, Marshall, in terms of the cost that I hadn't thought about. And the cost is that you don't get to experience that beatific internal state of awe, of just being.
Right.
Tim,
Yeah.
Selby, wait, we got to hear from Tim on this.
I'm just enjoying listening. That's good stuff right there. All of you, that's good. Yeah.
We'll let him answer the next question.
Next one.
Well, I think you guys started to go there too, just in terms of talking about, like, how do we actually find the beatific in the horrific? Tim, you talked about sinking in, and Karen, you're starting to refer to that, like, can we move towards it or experience it? Joanne, like, that we can use that as an experience. But often when people are in the horrific, again, like stressed out, overwhelmed, in war, in that fight or flight place, in survival, that's one of the hardest times to kind of settle, to go inward, to be with it, right? Again, our instinct is to push it away or to move it away. So how would you talk to somebody who's in that space to help them open or move towards it? Or how would you encourage them to find the beatific in what's pretty difficult?
Well, there are outer wars and pandemics, but really the fight that people are fighting all the time is the fight with their own mind. So I think there's two domains here. I don't think it's to suggest that we're going to find the beatific in Auschwitz, although there's many stories of that. I don't think that's what we're talking about here. I think it's to find a place that is not so ravaged by this hope and fear, this constant battle of hope and fear, attraction and repulsion. And I think that's the beatific we find, which is not in opposition to something else. It's actually underneath both of those, that we don't need to hope for something and hope something goes away. We don't need to look for the beatific. By definition, that quality that's underneath there is unchanging. So by definition, it's peaceful and reliable, and it feels whole. So I think it even transcends both the idea of horrific and beatific, actually.
Yeah, so you're not clinging to the beatific.
Not at all.
Not saying,
No.
okay, it's got, or like, also, Tim, I liked how you kind of were saying, like, it's not just saying, well, look on the bright side, or what's the silver lining here in a difficult situation. It goes a lot deeper than that.
Yeah,
No,
I
it's
think
accepting that they're oh, sorry. Go, Tim. It's your turn.
I was going to say, I think that sinking in image is a great one, in that the depth of the thing, is so powerful. When, I've for many years have asked people, when do you feel a sense of the sacred, close to God, the divine, whatever your language might be? And I would say, for a long time of doing that, there's two things that rise to the top. One are nature experiences. And the other one is experiences around death, that somehow both those things are where we experience some sense of sacredness. Now, the nature experiences might be, I think that speaks a little bit to transcendence. It's not really my mind, it's not really my intellect, it's not really what my hopes and things for my life. It's just an experience, a more pure experience of being and sinking into just being alive and being on the planet and being a part of all that. But the death experiences that's something that we would call horrific, but somehow there's a profound nature that happens in that. And Joanne could probably speak a lot to that, but that sense of, again, I think that touches on the transcendent, that, like, my little hopes and dreams for, like, what happens in my life right now. There's a whole lot bigger picture than that's going on here. And so the more that I can just sort of I love that image of just sinking into that, experience whatever that might be, not try to form it or shape it or want it to be one thing or another, but just allow myself to experience the moment that I'm in, the present moment, whatever that brings to me. The more I can just sort of sink into that, I think the more peaceful that becomes, because I'm not thrashing and striving for things to be different. I'm just sinking into the moment that I'm in.
And I think that's the gift that the horrific can give us, because especially on the larger side, it's more than we can control. Our defenses don't work anymore. It's what Ernest, you were saying earlier. We have to surrender our will because we can't stay in control. I mean, I've experienced it in moments where I'm completely out of control of the circumstance. I don't like it. It's not pleasant, but there's nothing I can do but surrender. And in that surrender comes the most incredible peace. And thus far in my life, it's always worked out fine. But boy, I had to go through every ounce of fighting it before I reached that surrender. And then the beatific, then that holy sacred instance came out. So it's a really sinking through any sense that I'm in control, and then recognizing how connected I am to everything.
Yeah,
And
I'm
what
trying to image that's always trying to struck me is that image of falling into a mighty rushing river, that's more powerful than you are. You can thrash and strive all you want. It's not going to help you out. But when you learn to let go and just flow,
Right.
it's going to take you where it is. And you're going to be in that kind of a Taoist sense, right? You're going to be in that flow, and you can allow that to be, and that will take you where it will. And that's okay. The more you can surrender to that, the more like the journey just opens up to you. That's not our instinct, right? Like thrashing and trying to get to shore is our instinct. And I spend a lot of time doing that, but it doesn't help, right?
I've recently been fascinated by, this goes back to Tim, what you're saying, the mind construct of how our memory can either benefit or get us stuck somewhere. And one of the things in terms of response to your question, Marshall, about how do you find the beatific and the horrific is, as Tim was suggesting, if you remember, you take your memory and you ask your memory to bring up those experiences, whether they were in nature, whether there was that river ride where you found that sense of peace, but those experiences that you've had from a very, very early childhood are still stored. And as you bring those up, our brain just lets our body re-experience that beatific, that sense of the sacred, the sense of awe. And what I'm finding with people, as you learn that posture or that body to hold on to that, and then think about the experience of the horrific, it seems to carry it through. So you can do it. What I've been exploring a little bit is this nature of, if you just think about it right now, those experiences where you have experienced the beatific, if I just put that idea in my mind, my body is already beginning to percolate a little bit. I'm getting different neurological symptoms. It's like, oh, that's what it is. I change eye patterns and my eye opens a little bit. And then from that, as I begin to understand that stance or that internal state, I can then take a look at what that horrific was and how I actually survived. What did I do that made a difference, even during that time that brought me to where I am now? So I think there's a lot of ways we can do that, and not only just within our bodies, but also visual images. I'll often have people, kind of, Tim, what you were saying, actually representing their understanding of the sacredness on a piece of paper, put that aside, and then have them draw their horrific experience, and just to take a look at the images. And you can see in the horrific images, the colors that are still in that horrific image. And people begin to then change that perspective a little bit, that, yeah, it's not one or the other, but they're both happening at the same time. So that's a little bit about how, for me, to move from the horrific to the beatific.
I was just thinking that it might also help us to recognize our solidarity with one another. Like people can be standing at the Niagara Falls or the Grand Canyon and together and say, look at this beautiful vision, and you can share that together. But you can also, like when there's been tragedies even in our own country in recent years, like Hurricane Katrina or whatever, the community comes together and all of a sudden they seem to forget about their own selfish stuff and they start helping their neighbor. You know, they start giving away food, they start putting sandbags to keep the river from overflowing, or they start rebuilding each other's homes or whatever. And there's a certain, hey, we're all in this together, we all just experienced a hurricane, let's just help each other out. And that's an ideal. I mean, I realize some people go and bash through stores and steal things too, but I think there's a solidarity that we can experience in the horrific where we look at our neighbor, together we're experiencing this pain, let's help each other through it. Let's hold each other's hand. How can I help you? And we can sort of forget about our own normal selfish first world concerns or whatever. And suddenly it's just down to the bare bones of, can we just get through this day together? You know, and we're all in this together. There's a basis of humanity there that we're all out of control, but we can make choices to help each other.
I think that's a beautiful example, Ernest. Like that sense of when you experience something really beautiful, what do you want to do? You want to call somebody and share it, right? And maybe when you're in a really difficult spot, it's that somebody who calls you, who says, "Hey, you're not alone in this. I care about you. I'm with you." That shared piece is so powerful.
You know, we would also say that there's incredible richness in the difficult experience. One of the greats of our tradition from the late 19th century, he said that, you know, suffering has so many qualities. It's got the qualities that it softens us, it connects us to other people, it makes us humble, it encourages us to keep, you know, to sort of move along whatever journey we have, because it doesn't feel good to stay there. So it's a great motivator. It teaches us so much about the world, and it can soften us so that we can become more sort of connected and empathetic with other people who are having the suffering that we have. I mean, if we had a pill, you know, that we could give everyone and they'd have no suffering at all, no difficulty at all, actually it would be a very cold place. I don't think there'd be a lot of compassion, a lot of connection. Everybody would be so ecstatic. I don't know. Doesn't make sense, you know.
Yeah, that's kind of my next question is, do we need the horrific to find the beatific? Do we need challenge and struggle and strife to recognize?
I think I would answer this question the same way as people ask, do we need pain to really gain? You know, like no pain, no gain. And at least from the course's perspective, you don't. But since most of us are acting out of that sort of more selfish will and our own defenses, you know, and that we're not in that sort of deep meditative state all the time of that connection, it's usually through the pain that we're woken up to the fact that we need to get out of our little sort of bubble. So do we need it? Not from everything I know, but do most of us wait for it before we get there? Yeah.
So it's kind of a motivator.
Well, it forces you to, as Tim was saying, it gets you along the path. I mean, you've got to move. Once the horrific's there, you don't want to stay there. So you can either keep grappling, as Tim Selby was saying, you know, keep fighting the river, or you can start to surrender and see what it is where the journey's taking you.
Actually, I actually think that we need the pain in order to move. I think if we look at most traditions anyway, the very, very greats of the tradition went through tremendous hardship. And it's through that hardship they developed depth and character and pliability and strength and compassion. I mean, there's just no way around it. And I think it's one of the things that a lot of people, you know, things have been really terrible in the last year, but a lot of people who basically we've created good lives, you know, for the most part, most people are fairly safe, they're fairly healthy. And it's very easy to fall asleep in that very, very cozy kind of world that we have created culturally. I think it's one of the reasons why we're losing our connection with the earth, with our spiritual roots, because we're so comfortable. You know?
Yeah, I think, I don't know if need is an interesting word, but I think most of the time, at least in my experience, that anybody who's really, you would think of really wise, really compassionate, really deeply wise, compassionate, deeply spiritual, they've typically been through some stuff, right? Like there's a wisdom that comes on the other side of pain that that maybe you don't find any other way. Like we'd all rather avoid it. Just sharing a poem this last weekend from Robert Kennedy, from Aeschylus, where he talks about we learn that through the awful grace of God, this grace that we find on the other side of places we don't want to be. So it's called kind of an awful grace, but yeah, like it's so many people that deeply embody that they've been down the road of some hard things, like it or not.
Yeah.
And it sure helps you to appreciate the beatific. If you've experienced the horrific, then you're much more grateful for the beatific. You don't take it for granted. You know?
Yeah, and you know, if you haven't, then I think people just go for, they can't really enjoy what they have. They just need more and more. As you know, we see it, and people who are very, very wealthy, they get more and more, and they're not happy. You know, so I think it's to have an experience or connection with really difficult times that allows us to appreciate what we have now, you know, rather than something we're chasing after into the future.
Yeah.
It might be kind of for me both. Sometimes we need the pain and sometimes we don't. Like I was just thinking the other day, I walked out, beautiful dusk, fresh mountain air. You know, I didn't need pain in order to appreciate the beatific in that moment.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that there's other times where it's like, yeah, I probably do need it to get me off the dime, to get me moving.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Great. So how do we then learn or grow from the horrific that comes up in our lives?
Well, you could ask how we've learned and grown in the last year.
Mhm.
And, you know, that would just be a good contemplation for all of us. I mean, one of my great fears is that we're going to quickly forget the lessons that we've learned in this year.
Mhm.
But, you know, when things are really bad, I think that the messages, you know, that things will always change, that we can't control, or we can't control this life, that will always change. And the only refuge that we have in the face of that is a mind that is balanced and relaxed. There's so much to learn from difficult times. Yeah.
I think one of them is acceptance that there will be difficult times. And instead of getting angry that life isn't the way we want it, how do we see what it is, you know, accept it and work with that? I think a lot of pain comes not so much just from the event, but from sort of thinking that the event shouldn't happen, or, you know, why is this happening to me? And all those questions and all that sort of internal fighting can make something that isn't a pleasant event, isn't perceived as a good event, and just magnify, you know, its awfulness. And I think that's where depression and anxiety so often crop up.
We make the distinction between pain and suffering. Pain is what happens, like, you know, a cut on your arm. Suffering is everything else we do about it. So we have this little adage some people use that suffering is pain plus resistance.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, at this point, I'd like to open it up for questions. I know a few of you have already posted some questions, but if you would like to ask a question, either you can post it in the chat and we can read it for you, or not in the chat, sorry, in the Q&A. I know there are two different places on your screen. So put questions in the Q&A. If you want to make a comment, you could go ahead and put that in the chat. And then if you would like to ask a question verbally, just raise your hand and we can call on you so that you can ask your question out loud. It can allow you to unmute. So, okay, I'll ask this question. How do you feel that our experience of the horrific and
No,
beatific?
look at the next. Angie said she didn't mean
Yeah.
to send that question.
I think she just sent it early, but I think it's still.
Oh, I see. I
ask
see.
it. Yeah, because we hadn't asked for questions yet. But I think it's okay asking. Okay. For the horrific and the beatific relate to man's search for meaning or to people trying to find meaning in their lives. I feel that the fact that we experience things as horrible or wonderful shows us that things in life matter, that the things of the soul matter for both us and for others, and can possibly have a greater forthcoming impact in the years in this life and even the next. Can you comment on this? Perhaps a good way to put this is, what are the elements that bring meaning to people's lives, where to they originate and why?
Well, I think this goes to, or at least my interpretation of that question and what she's saying goes to what Tim Olmsted was just saying. There's pain, and then there's the meaning we give it, and if we give it a positive meaning, like this is an opportunity to learn or something else, I mean, we're going to approach it very differently than if we give it a negative meaning, as in, this is happening to me because I was bad, or life is unfair. And then you have a completely different reaction. So I think we give things meaning. And if we don't like the result, we may want to question the meaning we've given it.
Okay, yeah, what about the rest of you?
Silence.
Yeah, the idea that, oops, it just disappeared. We're
Go on.
I think bottom line, I just think what gives us all meaning, I think, as human beings is relationship, having loving relationships with people, having a connectedness. We're not alone. And so that gives us meaning. If we can be in relationship, to love and to be loved, that gives us great meaning and purpose. And the questioner was asking, where does this come from? The obvious question for me is God put it inside of us. He just made us that way. So we seek love and we want to share love. That's just the way we're made, because God is love.
Yeah, I would tack on to that. Yeah. I think you hit it on the head there, Ernest. Relationship is really where we find the deepest meaning. Like, to that science fiction movie analogy, if you're the only person left on Earth, not much matters, right? Because it is really all about how we share it together. And a part of that in this piece of the beauty of the suffering is how that gets shared. That one of the greatest, I think, meanings. We talk about that. What's the man's search for meaning? What's the meaning in life? I think that a real depth of meaning in a spiritual sense is to enhance the life of other people, to ease a suffering, to enhance a joy or happiness of another person. That kind of service, I think most of our traditions would say that the way we serve our brothers and sisters to enhance life is probably one of the deepest, most deeply meaningful things that we can do. And it's all in the context of relationship, every single bit of it.
Yeah, which is interesting, Tim, because that's what you said earlier, is like you find that in death and nature, but the reality, I feel like, is it's in connection to each other. It's neither one of those. The third option would be our connection to each other, and I feel like that's what's lacking in the world is, we look out at the disconnectedness, that we can sit there and watch these wars on our TV and feel totally disconnected from it. And somehow, to me, that's the pathway to moving forward to a really richer and deeper world for all of us and our children, is like, how do we really get a better understanding of how does that disconnect take place that we can watch that and not feel compelled to do something about it. And it's such a crazy world we're in right now. I just feel like, but that to me is like what I've really been grappling with lately. you know, that's the real connection, the lack of connection, I guess, that we can sit back as Americans and not be more compelled to action.
And one image that comes to my mind that I think we can all relate to, maybe all the viewers and maybe everyone in this town, is that when a loved one dies, what do we want to do? We want to get together with our loved ones and remember them, whether you call it a celebration of life, whether you call it a funeral, prayer service, whether it's just crying, but you want to come together in the face of the horrific and share that burden with each other and remember that person and find some beauty in the fact that, well, we're still here and we're all connected by this person that we love. And let's just love each other more, because you never know when the next one of us is going to die, you know? And so the power of the funeral, I think, is amazing. It's just, it's what happens afterwards when everyone's having their fellowship together and realizing we're important to each other. Let's take care of each other. Let's not take this life for granted.
And even to add to that, it's also like the people that are not like us, like Greg Boyle, you know, like he talks about, you know, recognizing our shared struggle, that, you know, someone may be totally different from us and not in our group, but that we still share humanity and really celebrate that.
Yeah, so again, how we can use the horrific, I mean, that to me sounds like another example of how we use the horrific to find the beatific, that we can take tragedies of loss and death and war and suffering in the world and actually have an empathetic connection to those people and find it as a way to touch into our own pain and to their pain. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like a lot of what you guys have said today too is that, like, not creating a dichotomy between the two. That, you know, we sort of set up the topic to be the horrific versus the beatific, right? But I think what I'm hearing from a lot of you is that these are not dichotomous. These are not two different things. It's, you know, we may feel that way, or we may try to, again, push away things that we don't like and those anxieties, but ultimately, that's just our perception of these two different, you know, making them two different things. Would you guys agree with that? Does anyone?
Yeah, I think Ernest hit on it there with a funeral service or celebration of life. Is that horrific or beatific? Yeah, all of the above. You know, all of the, so these really important moments, we embrace it all at the same time. And we laugh and we cry, and, like, you know, to try and make some arbitrary separation of that is not real.
So I think you just said it, Tim. So there's a difference. What we normally try to do is divide the two. But what Tim just said, if we can embrace the whole thing, then the sweetness and the sort of bitterness of pain and the sweetness of the good, they come together and we become tenderized, full human beings that are with a big heart and connected to others. And I think the issue is, rather than to divide one from the other, is to just take the whole thing on. And the wisdom to sort of expand around the whole thing somehow. I think that's a lot of, my guess is that that's a very common theme in all contemplative traditions, this idea of learning to hold everything in a big embrace. I don't know.
Well, and isn't that where faith traditions, I think, sometimes get lost, is that, like, if you have a faith tradition that, like, that you don't embrace the horror, you don't embrace the pain. So, like, everybody's got like a fake smile all the time, and it's like, what in the world is going on? And the flip side of that is the faith community that that just is like, you know, can't celebrate, you know, everything's don't do this, don't do that, because don't have any fun in life, because, like, life's to be endured or something. Like, I think we get lost when we try to separate those things.
Yeah, beautiful. Really good.
Yeah. And I'm kind of hearing the themes of that, how to do it is that, like you were saying, Tim, go with the flow, and words like surrender, and can we open to it? Or Tim, you said sink into it, that those are all the ways. And Karen, you talk about moving towards it, you know, that we can make it not dichotomous, and we can find the beatific in the horrific if we're willing to open in that way.
I think just the acceptance that, you know, what Tim and Tim just said is that they come together. You know, we're the ones that are trying to separate it off, thinking we could have one without the other. But then you get a little bit, then you get nothing. I think Khalil Gibran said it when he said, if you want to avoid the pain in life, you're also going to avoid the pleasure, and you might as well just get off the threshing floor of life, because you're just going to live sort of in the shadow.
One of you shared during our meetings about the storm coming towards us, and it's a Native American story or whatever about going into the storm. Was that
Oh,
you,
the
Karen?
buffalo.
You should tell that story, Karen. Tell that story.
No, it wasn't. Somebody else said it, but
Oh.
It was the image of actually buffaloes move when there's a storm that comes, that buffaloes will run towards the storm, which is really intelligent, because if you run towards the storm, it passes more quickly, right? But naturally, we want to run away from the storm. But if you imagine the buffalo trying to run from the storm, it will experience that longer. So there's a lot of intelligence into that. And so then how do we run towards the storm? How can we open ourselves up to facing?
Well, the interesting thing is, if you open up to it and move towards it, it's gone. Because what you have been pushing away, you're now embracing. It's a different thing.
Right.
One of my teachers so beautifully said, nothing to protect is the greatest protection.
Mm-hmm.
So when we completely open up, there's nothing to be harmed. Everything becomes the sort of marvelous soup of life, So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really true, even on like an emotional and a physical level. When we can turn towards it and just sit with it, usually it dissipates, that emotion, that feeling, the pain in the body. It's when we resist it and push against it that it creates more tension, more tightness, more resistance. But they all have it. Yeah.
Moving with the buffalo analogy, a lot of people, and I understand that, I see it in my profession, are afraid that if they sit with the horrific, sit with the grief, sit with the pain, it's going to overwhelm them. And so they try to distract themselves or keep busy. And that's like the buffalo running away from the storm. You distract yourself and keep busy, and it's just going to keep haunting you. You take the courage to be overwhelmed and run into it. And as you were saying, Marshall, then you're going to find the release. So I think it's counterintuitive. We want to protect ourselves. We don't want to feel that overwhelmedness. But if we actually moved into it, it would dissipate so much faster than always trying to stay ahead of it.
Right. Yeah, and those distractions are often the things that create more problems for us, right? Drugs, alcohol, shopping, surfing the internet, all the things that we do to try to not feel the pain create another layer of pain for us.
Exactly.
Well, we also in the process don't get in contact with our strength, because we haven't exercised it.
Yeah.
Karen and Marshall are both therapists or counselors, and I have a question for you, but you both, maybe Joanne as well. I heard one time, and sometimes I've told people this, I just want to know what you think of this. Someone has this great fear, they're afraid of some great pain that's on the horizon. And sometimes I've told people, well, just imagine the worst possible scenario. Like, what would be the worst way that this whole thing could come out? And just imagine, let's talk about that. And then if that really happened, could you handle it? Could you get through it? What would you do to get through that? Could you survive the worst possible thing you can imagine with regard to this situation? And once they talk about that and think about that and say, well, I guess I could, I think I have the resource, this is what I would do, and I guess I could survive. And then say, okay, well, if you could just accept that the worst possible thing might happen, then go forward without any fear, and maybe it won't be quite as bad. It might not be that bad, but at least you're ready to accept the worst, and then just go forward and hope for the best. Is that good counsel? I don't even know. What do you think?
I would add just one thing, not go forward without any fear. That's close to impossible, but go forward despite the fear. Acknowledge the fear, recognize that the fear that is there biologically to keep you from walking into it. It's saying you're going to die. If you've looked at the worst case scenario and you're not going to die, or, you can survive it, then walk into the fear, acknowledge it, but it's not saving you from anything. It's actually prolonging it.
The fear. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, it's kind of what Tim was saying. Like, if there's nothing left to fear, like there's no problem, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But very often you have to walk into the fear to realize there's nothing left to fear. I mean,
Yeah.
you can't make the fear go away, at least in my experience, professionally and personally. You can't make the fear go away first. You've got to face the fear and then realize it doesn't have any power over you.
Right. Nothing.
And I would also suggest too that the nature of fear and its purpose instinctually is to one of protection.
Right.
So there may be a part of you, a part of a person that needs to hear that they are protected, and how are they protected in that experience? How can they be protected in it? So I think we have to honor, from my perspective, we have to honor the resistance. The resistance has something to say to us as well. And so sometimes if we just find out what that is, if it is in fear, if it is in that part needs protection, it might be the little kid in you that needs protection. So how are you going to do that for that little kid? So that's all kind of more of a symbolic internal conversation that goes on in a reflective nature as a result of, there's a part that wants to run from the storm. I mean, that's just, as Marshall, you said, that's instinct. So it's like, okay, so if that part wants to run, what does it need in order to participate in running towards the storm?
Right.
Sometimes if you do that kind of inner work, it will make a difference as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, we had one question here for you, Tim Olmsted. Would that, when you talked about embracing both the horrific and the beatific, is that what is referred to as the genuine heart of sadness in Buddhism?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, we could work with that. We have this beautiful concept of the genuine heart of sadness. And what this talks about is when we move along the journey, the path, whatever it might be, and we begin to develop some sense of inner peace, goodness, sweetness, the divine, whatever. And we look out and the truth of the reality of people's lives hits us so hard that the heart opens up, but it's extremely tender, because we feel so much in sync. It's so much tenderized, and sort of we feel the poignancy of the world as we open up. The world opens up into us, and so this really deep, rich, potent place, and we call it the tender heart of sadness. That all of it comes from sadness. The potential, the potency of sadness in a really beautiful way. Yeah.
Well, Tim, can you explain more about the sadness? Like, why is it sad? Is it because it's horrific? Is it because it's...
Because people suffer. Because we have so much and we suffer. Just like a mother looking at her child, you know what I mean, who's upset because they had a bad morning at school or something. We just feel for them because it's so sweet, and we know that they're in pain. So that's the sadness, that we all suffer so, and unnecessarily.
So the genuine heart of sadness, is this kind of a perpetual state? Like the world is just
It's the state of a contemplative person with a soft heart, a smile on their lips, and a tear in their eye. Just a really sensitive connection with the world.
Because of the fact that people are suffering, that's what causes the sadness, and acceptance of this collective suffering.
I think so.
Interesting.
I think so. If we find peace and we look out and we see other people suffering, the only humane response is a deep sense of a sadness and a calling to do what we can do. But internally, the feeling is tenderness, kind of softness.
Empathy, compassion.
All of it.
Yeah.
All of it. You know.
I'm kind of wondering, Ernest, if that's not more along the lines of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. where he weeps over Jerusalem.
Yeah, I think so. Yes. Yeah, wounded heart.
Yeah, wounded.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. My first teacher said that the feeling is like having open heart surgery with no anesthesia.
Yeah,
It's that,
good.
it's like the world has just gone in and grabbed your heart.
Yeah.
It's that immediate. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a question from someone. She says, I'm interested in hearing why most religions idealize martyrs or inflicted suffering on purpose. Is this the way to the sacred? I've never really understood or agreed with this concept.
Well, I'll say, in the Christian tradition, martyrdom is not inflicted upon oneself. It's a pain that's endured because somebody else chooses to inflict the suffering on the person. The Christian martyrs stood up for their faith and they got rejected for it and they were willing to die for it. So we hold that up as a virtue of faithfulness. Like from the Christian perspective, I still believe that Jesus rose from the dead and I'm going to preach it. And if you want to kill me for it, go ahead and kill me for it. I still believe it. That's the virtue of faithfulness to the end and being willing to surrender your life for a truth or for a love of God. And so in the Christian tradition, it's held up as a virtue. Even Jesus himself, he didn't kill himself. He didn't nail himself to the cross. He accepted the persecution and offered himself in love. So that's the idea. Sacrifice can be an expression of love.
I would throw in, I think that Ernest is a beautiful example of I think of the positive side of that. I think maybe the question might hint upon, there has been, like in the Christian tradition, a tradition of self-flagellation, of redemptive suffering, of that suffering becomes redemptive, that in some sense God values suffering in terms of attaining redemption. And that has kind of crept in. And I think that is a misapplication, like of what you're talking about, that the idea that God looks upon us and wants suffering because of sinfulness, wants kind of suffering to be our redemption. I think it's a twisted distortion of that. I think you described the positive side of that, this sacrificial love that we pour out, but the idea that God desires suffering, I think that's an error of that theology.
Yeah, I'm thinking, I have a question on this to you, Tim Olmsted. People like Milarepa, who is considered a saint in the Buddhist tradition, who went through incredible suffering and hardship to attain enlightenment. Explain that, sort of that idea of like, was that necessary? Because that to me feels kind of like martyrdom or self-inflicted suffering.
Yeah, they just had more desire than we have. It's just however high you put the goal, to that degree you will be energized to do whatever you need to do. So Milarepa is a great saint in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. He went through incredible hardships, and yes, he started out as a really bad kid, and then his story of his life, and he met his teacher, and his teacher put him through all these hardships. He made him build a tower out of stone. It was finished. The teacher told him to knock it down, on and on. There's famous stories. But I think that kind of suffering, what that did was it softened him and made him receptive to learning. That's why he had to go through to break down his pride, his arrogance, his just toughness altogether, and really put him on an edge. So then he was open. So I don't think it was martyrdom. I think it was just part of it's just part of the process of a master preparing what that master knew was going to be a world-changing student. I mean, he was extraordinary.
Well,
And then the austerities that he went through, this has been a part of the Buddhist tradition, all the way from the beginning, but the Buddha was very clear. He went through a period of terrible austerities. And at the end, he said, it's the mind that suffers, not the body. So we need a strong body. So that kind of heavy
Wow.
martyrdom thing was not part of our
That's
tradition.
fascinating. Wow.
Yeah.
Huh.
That goes
Yeah,
back to what we've been talking about tonight. He went through the horrific the breaking down, the pliant, becoming more pliable to find the beatific.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
guess, you might label that as martyrdom, but that's not necessarily, that's not necessarily what it is.
Mhm. Mhm.
I think the motive has a lot to do with it, So when Tim Selby was talking about self-flagellation and that sort of thing, it's the motive. Like, why am I doing it? So if I struggle with gluttony and I decide to avoid certain foods, or I decide to just eat one meal a day or fast or whatever, the motive is to get control of my gluttony. It's not to inflict pain upon my body. It's to get freedom from this addiction, this desire to eat more than I need to. And if I'm a pursuer of pleasure and I just seek pleasure all the time as much as I possibly can, the meaning of life is to pursue pleasure. Well, if I get a whip and strike my back, I'm having suffering upon my back. Maybe it's helping me to not become so focused on pursuing pleasure. So it's the motive, I think, that goes with it. It's not beating yourself up. God's not pleased with that, but he wants us to get over addictions, compulsions, destructive behaviors, and he wants us to grow in virtue. And so sometimes that involves a little bit of pain. And Jesus fasted in the desert for 40 days before he began his public ministry, so the Gospels say. So there can be some self-denial, even of the body, can help us, fasting can help us have a greater hunger for God or for the love of people or something like that, rather than just, I want to satisfy myself. So I think the motive is what's important, and each individual is different with regard to that. And so, you might even go to the gym and beat yourself up because you want to get bigger muscles, so it's the motive.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not the pain, inflicting pain on yourself that God is pleased with.
Sure. Okay, great. Thank you.
Tim,
So-
I thought you got voted off the island there for a minute.
But no, I'm interested, Tim, did this person inflict pain upon himself, or was it from his teacher that he got the pain? Doing the tower and knocking it over and that sort of thing.
It was the teacher.
Yeah, okay. So he wasn't martyring himself. He wasn't inflicting pain on himself. He was just accepting that life on life terms as a path to growth. He was accepting the teacher's disciplines.
That's right.
Which I see as very virtuous,
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, gang, I think we will wrap it up there. I think this has been a really fruitful conversation, and I'm definitely will take away some of the themes that we talked about tonight of letting go and surrender and opening ourselves up to the pain, the buffalo moving towards it, thinking in. And I think for me, what really hit home is that these are not two different concepts, that's just a false narrative that we might create, that these are dichotomous somehow. And that we can actually use the horrific to find the beatific if we're willing to open to it. So thank you, all of you leaders, for being a part of it. And thanks for those who are watching with us this evening. I'm just posting in the chat here, if anyone wants to contribute to the organization, there's a link to our donation page on our website. Most of you know, but we do these forums about every 3 months or so. And I'm really hoping and expecting our next one will be in person, but we'll keep you posted on that. And for those of you who are joining from afar, we will continue to stream these events, probably through our Facebook page. So even if you are not in Steamboat, we will continue to allow access to these public meetings. If you're not on our contact list, we only use it to let you know about our events, and you can sign up to be on our contact list, again, through our website, where there's a link there. You can sign up through the website, and we can keep you updated. Yeah, I think that's it. So thanks so much for being a part of it, and we'll hope to see you again in a few months.
Great.
Thank you, Joanne.
Joanne, thank you for
Thank
bringing
you.
up this
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks.
Thanks.
for reminding me a lot.
Thanks,
you.
Marshall and Tim.
It was
See
fun.
you, everybody.
You guys.
Bye.
Bye. Good night.
Take care.
Good to
Good
see you
night.
all. Take care.
Yeah.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, Steve.
Bye, Joanne. Take care.
You too.
I hope I'm going to do